So when you hear international law, you imagine real rules. Rules that can stop wars, protect civilians, and hold leading governments accountable. We're told the UN Charter, the Geneva Conventions, the courts in The Hague are the guardrails of civilization, built after world wars so the horrors don't repeat. That's the story. But watch what happens when a powerful country decides the rules are optional. Ceasefire resolutions can die with a single veto. Court orders can land with a thud. Wars can drag on, filmed in HD, while consequences arrive as speeches, not enforcement. So if international law is real, why does it keep losing in public? Because the system isn't held together by justice, it's held together by power, and power has a playbook. 3 mechanisms that let the strongest states bend the rules, outsource the violence, and walk away clean. This is how to break international law and get away with it. Welcome to Empire Secrets. Before we get into the playbook, we need to understand the game. What exactly is this system that looks formidable, but seems so fragile in practice? The modern idea of international law was born from global trauma in the mid-20th century. After 1945, the goal was to create a rules-based order that would stop powerful states from just invading their neighbors or committing mass atrocities whenever they felt like it. That foundation is the United Nations Charter. Its principles are noble. Protect national sovereignty and prohibit the use of force except in self-defense. A whole constellation of institutions was set up to enforce this. The UN General Assembly is the global town hall where every nation gets a vote. The International Court of Justice, or ICJ, was set up in The Hague to settle legal disputes between states. And much later, in 2002, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, was established to persecute individuals for the worst crimes imaginable: genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. As of June 2025, 125 states are party to the Rome Statute, which created the court. But here's a fatal flaw woven into its DNA. Enforcement. International law isn't like the law in your country. There's no global police to arrest a head of state. There's no world prison for a nation that breaks the rule. The entire system runs on consent. Sanctions can be imposed, judgments can be issued, but in the end, enforcement relies on the political will of other nations, and most critically, on the will of the most influential players on the board. This is the grand illusion. We have this beautiful, intricate legal palace, but its walls are made of paper. And the first chapter of that playbook is a masterpiece of self-interest written directly into the UN's founding document. The heart of the UN's mission to keep the peace is the Security Council. This is the one body with the power to make legally binding decisions for all member states. It can deploy peacekeepers and even approve military intervention. In theory, it's the world's ultimate enforcement mechanism. In practice, it's the world's most powerful instrument of impunity. And it all comes down to one word: veto. When the UN was founded, 5 countries, the victors of World War II, gave themselves a special status. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, now Russia, and China were made permanent members of the Security Council, the P5, and they were each given the power of the veto. This means that any one of these 5 nations can single-handedly block any major resolution, no matter how much support it has from the other 192 countries. The justification was that the UN could only work if the great powers were on board, but in the 80 years since, the veto has morphed from a tool for consensus into the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. It's a legal escape hatch that guarantees the P5 and their closest allies can never be held accountable by the very rules they're supposed to enforce. There's no more tragic example of this than the situation in Gaza. Following the brutal Hamas-led attacks on October 7, 2023, Israel launched a military campaign which has involved indiscriminate strikes and the blocking of essential humanitarian aid, leading to widespread famine and the displacement of nearly 1.9 million people. Many international law experts have argued these actions constitute war crimes. In response, a series of resolutions demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire were brought to the UN Security Council. They had overwhelming support. But on the 8th of December 2023, and again on the 20th of February 2024, they were blocked, not by a majority vote, but by the veto of one country, the United States. While the world called for an end to the violence, the US used its veto to paralyze the international community. The justification was often that the resolutions weren't balanced or didn't sufficiently condemn Hamas. But the effect was clear: to shield an ally from international pressure, even as the civilian catastrophe deepened. This forced other nations to seek other, less powerful options. On the 29th of December 2023, South Africa filed a case at the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of violating the Genocide Convention. On the 26th of January 2024, the court issued a preliminary ruling ordering Israel to prevent acts of genocide and allow aid to flow. And yet, without a Security Council resolution to enforce it, even a ruling from the world's highest courts can be, and has been, largely ignored. And this isn't just an American tactic. It's a core feature of the P5 playbook. For over a decade, Russia has used its veto to protect its interests and its allies. During the Syrian civil war, Russia, often with China, repeatedly used its veto to block resolutions aimed at holding the Assad regime accountable for mass atrocities, including the documented use of chemical weapons on its own people. In multiple instances, Russia vetoed efforts to extend the mandate of international bodies investigating chemical attacks, effectively shutting down accountability. The veto gave the Syrian government a license to kill, free from the threat of UN sanctions. Then came the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, a textbook violation of the UN Charter. The invasion has been characterized by widespread war crimes. The international response was swift condemnation. But at the Security Council, where a binding resolution could have been passed, Russia simply vetoed it. So how can a system hold an aggressor accountable when the aggressor holds the power to cancel any consequences? The answer is, it can't, because it was built that way. A two-tier system of justice, one set of rules for most countries, another for the 5 that designed the system. Breaking international law isn't always as crude as rolling tanks across a border or casting a veto in New York. Sometimes the most effective weapons aren't bombs, but dollars. This second strategy is more subtle but just as coercive, weaponizing economic power. In our globalized world, if you can control the flow of money, trade and investment, you can bend smaller nations to your will. This is the golden leash. The master of this domain is, surprise, the United States. Not just because of its military, but because of its central role in the global financial system. The US dollar is the world's primary reserve currency. Most global trade is done in dollars, and most major banks are tied to the American financial system. This gives Washington an extraordinary power, the ability to cut a country off from the global economy. The sharpest blade in this arsenal is secondary sanctions. Primary sanctions are straightforward. An American company can't do business with Iran. Secondary sanctions go further. They say that a German company, a South Korean bank, a Brazilian energy firm, any of them, can be barred from the American financial system if they do business with the sanctioned state. It forces every corporation on Earth into a binary choice: access to the United States or access to the target country. The scale of that imbalance means that there's never a real choice. Iran is the model scenario. Even after the 2015 nuclear deal, when European companies rushed in with investments, everything changed the moment Washington withdrew from the agreement and reimposed secondary sanctions. Overnight, European firms pulled out, not because their own governments ordered them to, but because the cost of defying the US was fatal. Washington effectively enforced its foreign policies on its allies, overriding a multilateral agreement without consulting anyone. But the golden leash doesn't only tighten around official enemies. Sometimes it grips nations already tied into Western institutions, and the result is just as destabilizing. Look at Indonesia in 1997 and 1998, during the Asian financial crisis. The country's currency collapsed, and panic ripped through the economy. The International Monetary Fund stepped in with a rescue package, but the money came with conditions that tore through the country's political foundations. Subsidies were slashed, state monopolies dismantled, foreign ownership rules rewritten, and prices on essential goods skyrocketed. None of this was voted on by Indonesians. It wasn't even debated. It was imposed. The reforms deepened the crisis. Protests exploded, violence erupted, and the streets turned volatile. Within months, President Suharto, who had ruled Indonesia for 31 years, was forced to resign. The IMF didn't engineer a coup, it didn't need to. The economic terms alone reshaped the nation's politics. A sovereign government fell because the financial lifeline came tied to a noose. A similar story unfolded more recently in Greece, but with a twist that made it even more shocking. This was happening inside the European Union, to a democratic country governed by elected leaders. When Greece's debt crisis spiraled in the early 2010s, the EU and IMF offered bailouts that were less rescue packages and more economic colonization plans. Greece was ordered to slash pensions, raise taxes, privatize airports, ports, utilities, highways, even entire islands. Budget authority was effectively transferred to the Troika, a group of foreign technocrats who could veto domestic policy. When the Greek people voted against austerity in a national referendum, the message was ignored. The bailout terms remained unchanged. The democratic will of a nation was overwritten because the financial system had already been placed in foreign hands. It wasn't a military violation of sovereignty, it was an economic one, precise, clinical, and devastating. And while Western governments and institutions perfected these tools, they're no longer the only ones using them. China is now writing its own version of the Golden Leash through the Belt and Road Initiative. On paper, it's the world's largest infrastructure plan. In reality, it's a geopolitical network built on long-term debt. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy, an argument that remains contested but impossible to ignore. When a country struggles to repay a massive infrastructure loan, Beijing doesn't need to invade or threaten. It can simply demand strategic concessions. Control of a port, preferential voting at the UN, silence on human rights issues, alignment on key geopolitical decisions. Dependency becomes influence, and influence becomes leverage. It's a slower, more patient method where the outcome mirrors the same logic. Reshape a country's behavior through economic gravity rather than force. Whether it's Washington using sanctions, the IMF enforcing structural reforms, the EU guiding austerity, or China leveraging debt, the effect is identical. A nation's sovereignty is weakened not through warfare, but through the simple fact that in a global financial system, the one holding the purse strings holds the power. But economic pressure only works in daylight, when the stakes climb and deniability becomes essential. The playbook slips into its next, darkest chapter. The final move in the system manual is for when a veto is too public and economic pressure is too slow. This is the strategy of the grey zone, that murky space between peace and declared war. Operating here means using force in a deliberately ambiguous way, making it nearly impossible to prove who's responsible and therefore impossible to trigger a formal response under international law. It's the art of plausible deniability. Grey zone tactics include everything from cyber attacks that cripple a nation's infrastructure, to disinformation campaigns that sow chaos, to using proxy forces and mercenaries to achieve military goals without leaving official fingerprints. This strategy directly exploits a key weakness of international law: the need for attribution. To hold a state accountable for an act of aggression, you have to prove they did it. The grey zone is designed to make that proof impossible to find. The perfect illustration is Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. The world watched as well-armed soldiers in unmarked green uniforms, the Little Green Men, suddenly seized control of the Ukrainian peninsula. Moscow flatly denied any involvement, claiming they were just local self-defense groups. Was this an invasion? An uprising? While the world scrambled to figure it out, Russia consolidated control. By the time everyone caught on, it was too late. Because Russia never formally declared war and constantly denied its role, it short-circuited the international legal response. There was no clear act of aggression to trigger a response under the UN Charter. It was a masterclass in ambiguity. While Russia has perfected the modern grey zone operations, the US wrote the original playbook on covert action. One of the reference cases is in the 1980s, the Shadow War in Nicaragua. The US officially denied involvement, yet a covert network of CIA-backed forces, the Contras, waged a sustained campaign to destabilize the left-wing Sandinista government. Washington didn't declare war, didn't send regular troops, and didn't take responsibility. It funneled money and weapons through black budgets and third-party channels, turning the conflict into a deniable proxy operation. When the International Court of Justice ruled that the US had violated international law, Washington simply rejected the verdict. The ambiguity had already served its purpose. Another major case came decades later, with Iran's nuclear program being targeted by Stuxnet, a cyber weapon so sophisticated it stunned the world's intelligence community. This malicious code didn't blow up a facility or bomb a reactor, it silently infected nuclear centrifuges, causing them to malfunction while reporting normal activity. The attack set Iran's program back years. Officially, no country admitted responsibility. Unofficially, it was attributed to a US-Israeli covert operation. No missiles, no invasion, no signatures, just a piece of digital sabotage that achieved the effect of a military strike without giving the target a clear legal justification to retaliate. While states, journalists, and lawyers search for a smoking gun, the ground reality has already been altered. Governments fall, infrastructure collapses, maps change, and the perpetrators walk away untouched, shielded by the fog they created. In the grey zone, the law isn't just broken, it's bypassed entirely. So, that's the playbook. Not a loophole, not a glitch, but a fully functioning network of impunity. It begins with the UN veto, it expands through economic leverage, and it matures in the grey zone. The system was never designed to restrain a superpower, it was designed to manage everyone else. And the cost of that design, it's paid in shattered cities and displaced families in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan. It's paid by smaller nations whose political futures can be rewritten by decisions made thousands of miles away. And it's paid by all of us in the slow erosion of the idea that rules can protect us from force. Yet the system isn't completely sealed. Every so often, a crack appears. On May 12, 2025, Libya's internationally recognized government voluntarily accepted ICC jurisdiction, a rare moment where a state invited scrutiny instead of shielding itself. It's a reminder that the desire for a real rules-based order is still there, even if the reality remains fragile. International law exists, but it isn't self-executing. It can declare what's legal, it can name what's criminal, it can even issue orders. But when the strongest actors on the world stage decide not to comply, the system can only do what it is allowed to do. We're told to live in a world of laws, but the evidence says we live in a world of power, and power's first rule is simple: it writes its own exceptions. This was Empire Secrets. Subscribe now. Your desire, your empire.